It's episode 13 of the My Child Will Thrive podcast, and here's what's coming up. She's written a book called What Every Parent Should Know About Special Education Law. And before devoting her practice to advocating for children with special needs, she practiced in corporate law and litigation in Manhattan. Her passion for supporting children and their families stems from her own experience with her own 5 children that happen to have special needs as well. She's worked diligently over a decade to forge productive relationships between New Jersey school district members and parents, and she also frequently presents to parents at Children's Specialized Hospital and for volunteer lawyers for justice. A quick disclaimer before we get started. My Child Will Thrive is not a substitute for working with a qualified healthcare practitioner. The information provided on this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat your child. Please consult your healthcare practitioner before implementing any information or treatments that you have learned about on this podcast. There are many gifted, passionate, and knowledgeable practitioners with hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of study and clinical experience available to help guide you. Part of our goal is to give you the knowledge and tools you'll need to effectively advocate for your child so that you don't blindly implement each new treatment that comes along. No one knows your child better than you. No one knows your child's history like you do or can better judge what is normal or abnormal for your child. The greatest success in recovery comes from the parent being informed and asking the right questions and making the best decisions for their child in coordination with a team of qualified practitioners in different areas of specialty. Now on with the show. Welcome back. I'm really excited to talk to you today about special education law and how it affects your child. And in particular, I have a very knowledgeable guest that has both the practical knowledge as a parent as well as the technical knowledge as a lawyer as my guest on the podcast today to talk about this. She's written a book called What Every Parent Should Know About Special Education Law. And her name is Greer Gerland. And let me just give you a little background about Greer before I dive into the interview with her. Greer graduated from Harvard College in 1991 with a degree in English, and she went on to graduate from Harvard Law School in 1994. And before devoting her practice to advocating for children with special needs, she practiced in corporate law and litigation in Manhattan. She's a member of the New Jersey Bar and was also admitted to the New York Bar in 1994. And as I said, she understands from both a personal and a legal perspective the challenges of parents with children with special needs face. Her passion for supporting children and their families stems from her own experience with her own 5 children that happen to have special needs as well. She's worked diligently over a decade to forge productive relationships between New Jersey school district members and parents. And she also frequently presents to parents at Children's Specialized Hospital and for volunteer lawyers for justice. She's also facilitated support groups for caregivers of children with autism, and her compassion for parents and children fuels her uncommon perseverance as a special education attorney. Without hesitation, that I think this is going to be an excellent episode for anybody that is starting to think about what, or is in the thick of things of what to do with their kids. I learned some very interesting information that you could be starting to work on your child's education plan is with their school as early as 2.5, which was a lot earlier than I would have ever anticipated doing that. So that's just one of the many things we get into over the course of this episode. So before we dive in, I just want to let you know that Greer's book will be available. There'll be a link to it. So if you need to pick it up, which I highly recommend, it will be linked to episode 13 of the My Child Will Thrive podcast on the website. So that would be www.mychildwillthrive.com/podcast013. And take a look at a link to the sponsor for today, which is the Autism, ADHD, and Sensory Processing Disorder Summit, which is going to air from June 19th through the 28th of 2017. It's going to allow you to watch interviews with the leading experts in many areas that affect our children, from microbiome research to clinicians in the area of biomedical interventions, as well as functional neurologists, talks on PANS and PANDAS, and much, much more. I highly encourage you to sign up for free. And you can, again, do that either on the mychildwillthrive.website.com, or you can go directly to www.autism-ADHD-and-sensory-processing-disorder-summit.com. So welcome to the podcast today, Greer.
It is so great to be here. I love speaking to other parents like me. So I truly want to be here. Thank you for having me. Our pleasure.
So let's just start out by talking about how you got into the special education law and your history with your kids.
Sure, because I asked myself how I got into this too. And I have to say, I think I'm a little bit of an accidental lawyer, at least an accidental special education lawyer, because I was a lawyer way before my husband and I had our 5 kids, and I did corporate law and litigation, and it wasn't that meaningful for me. I didn't really feel like I was making a difference. And when I got married and we had our kids, I really planned to be home with them and take care of them and devote myself to nurturing them. And that is what I did. But the surprise for me was when we realized that we had children with various learning disabilities and other special needs, including autism and ADHD, I found that I learned what I used in law school very much to help them. And I also found that there was so much that I needed to learn that just was not intuitive. And I had the advantage of already having been a lawyer. I was licensed in New York at that time, and I studied for the New Jersey bar so that I could really do everything that I could in New Jersey. And it really was a long journey for me, an emotional one, in addition to the educating part, learning what I needed to learn in order to be, and I struggle every day, to be the best advocate that I can for my kids. So I really have spent the last decade advocating for my kids, for my neighbors' kids, speaking broadly, and then practicing professionally as a special education attorney to really understand the system and figure out how best to help all of our kids. And now I'm home with my kids, and I really spend a lot of time just trying to share what I know with as many parents as possible. And the book, I have to say, was not at all the book I ever thought I would write. I'm a writer at heart, and I love to write, and I think that's why I wound up expressing what I know in that format. But I really just hate miscommunication. And I don't know if you remember that show, Three's Company.
Yes.
That show, I have a visceral reaction to that show. It bothers me so much when there's a miscommunication. And every episode was premised on the fact that someone left a letter for someone that they didn't see, or a note got lost and someone misunderstood someone else's intention. And it just bothers me so much that there is so much miscommunication and misunderstanding out there about what special education is, who it's for, how to access it, and that leads to so much suffering. I see the looks on other parents' faces, and I understand it because I often have it. When it comes to figuring out what to do to help our kids. So, my journey to being a special education lawyer and really an advocate for other parents to help them help their own kids was not something that I ever planned. I think a lot of us have that experience, like takes us on paths that we never would have designed for ourselves and are so much more enriching probably than what I could have thought of on my own. But that's how I came to do what I do now, which is really just trying to reach as many parents as I can to share my story and to try to spare them a little bit of what I went through.
Yeah, well, and it's funny that you say that, because that's very similar to why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. So I thank you for that. And what I will say is your book is extremely accessible for parents. So I really encourage people to go out and pick up a copy off of Amazon, and we'll put the link in the show notes. It is a really easy to read book, so it's not done in legalese for those parents that are concerned about that. It's actionable and has lots of tips and tools, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the podcast. So I'm really, as I said to you before we started recording today, very excited to have you here because I think this is going to be extremely practical, useful, and essential information to many parents.
I'm so glad, and I really just wanted to share everything that I know for other parents, other kids, and for my own kids one day when they grow up and they're looking at their own amazing children and wondering what the best thing to do is and where to start and where to go after that and after that.
That's great. So why don't we start right there? I mean, I think that a lot of, so there'll be parents that are listening that both already have their children in school and have experienced this. And I'll just preface this by saying, obviously, we are speaking around the rules of law regarding in the U.S., and they will vary from country to country because we've got people listening in from other countries. But I will still say that most of the step-by-step practices will be very similar, and you'll just need to adjust for the laws of your particular country or state or province that you are located in. But let's talk about, if you have a child that's preschool age, what should you be thinking about as you approach the school age years?
There's a lot to think about. If you have a child who's 0 to 3, you may be doing early intervention. You may know already that your child is struggling with a challenge or has a diagnosis. One thing that a lot of parents don't know is the basics of how to just begin moving into really public school. So when you graduate, when you're in that preschool or 0 to 3 range, at age 3, children become eligible for a public school education if they have a disability that addresses their needs at that point. And a lot of parents, I find, who even have their children in early intervention, and I didn't know either at the time, don't know that when their child is 2.5, that is the time to be writing a letter to the director of special services in your local public school district, asking for your child to be evaluated for special education and related services. Because when the child turns 3, if the child qualifies, they are eligible to receive special education and related services. And my kids walked into their preschool programs in the district, those free programs that were wonderful for them, on their 3rd birthday with their birthday cupcakes. But as a parent, in order to make that happen and in order for there to be a seamless transition from your child receiving services from early intervention or whatever your private provider is to the public school system, the parent has to take on this role of advocate for their child. And often they have to be the one to sort of get that ball rolling. And so what I try to teach parents is how to be that advocate once their children become eligible for special education, so they know how to work with the school to get the services in place and the programming in place for their kids. Because I've seen time and time again that when kids are in the right programs, they thrive. But the law really envisions that parents will play a certain role in that process. And so in order for it to work and to work well for students so that they get what they need to make progress, there is a lot for parents to do. And I just find that it really is a struggle for so many of us, including me, to do that and to keep on doing that, because there really are real obstacles.
Yeah. So do parents need a diagnosis before they go about the process of writing that letter to the public school?
No, not at all. Not at all. All parents have to do is write a letter to the school, and I put a form in the book with their forms all over. But it can be this simple. Dear director, I'm concerned about my child, Jill. Please evaluate her for special education and related services immediately or as soon as possible. I look forward to working with you sincerely. And parents need to write that letter, walk it over to the director of special services office, which is right in town. And if you don't know that person or where they're located, you can ask at any of the local public schools, elementary, middle school, high school, everyone knows who that is. You walk that letter over. It has to be addressed to that person. You can't speak to the principal or speak to teachers. But by writing that letter, parents start a process that's governed by law, and the school only has a certain number of days, usually 20, to get back to you to start the process of evaluating the child to see whether special education is appropriate. And there are so many hurdles to that for parents. I mean, one, that it is so emotional. I mean, when you have a child with a disability, as I know, it is hard enough to get through the day with whatever challenges the day may bring. And it's hard enough to deal with. Oftentimes parents tell me about the stigma. What will people think? What will my child think of themselves if they know that they have a special need? It's hard to do the work of reaching out to the school to ask for what your child needs, because it is so emotional. And also because I find that so many parents just don't know what their rights are. I mean, when I'm working with a school, I always want to be reasonable. As a parent, I want to be reasonable. I don't always know, and I know better now, but when I was starting out, I didn't know. Is what I'm asking for help for my child reasonable? Am I entitled to this? Or am I asking for something that's really, beyond? And parents, that's why it's so important to me to educate parents, not only about how important they are in their child's future in terms of getting them the education they need, but also just giving them the tools, the information about the system and what their rights are so that they know what to do going forward. And something else that I find that I've learned and that's been reinforced to me so many times over the years is that relationship building matters so much. And as parents, we know so much about, it feeds us, right? Our relationships with our children, with our spouses, with our community members. It matters so much to connect with people and to really partner with them in figuring out your child and what your child needs. So over and over, I'm finding that I'm counseling parents to find those members in the school system who understand their child. And when they're working with the teams, it should not be an adversary process. If everyone knows what the law is and everyone has information about the child, it's really important to take an approach of problem solving and working together to find or create the program that works for the child. And to get back to what you said about, do I have to have a diagnosis to approach the school? Children don't need to have a diagnosis to qualify for special education to begin with. But when you approach a school, children are entitled to special education if they have a disability that adversely affects their school functioning. And when you are approaching a school, the schools themselves, they have an obligation, it's called a child find obligation, to identify children in their district who have disabilities that affect their functioning in school and to do evaluation. So the school will partner with you in figuring out what the challenges are that your child faces. But the parent often has to be the one to say, I notice that my child has a lot of trouble whenever I'm in a noisy room, or is holding their ears whenever the lawnmower goes down, or I notice that my child has great difficulty looking a friend in the eye even when they're playing, or I notice that my child tends to have a great deal of anxiety anytime that I ask them to do something that's a little bit difficult for them. And the school is required to assess children in all areas of suspected disability. So as parents, part of our job is to bring to the school information to educate the school team in part about who your child is, because I agree with you, you know your child best, what they're struggling with, what their challenges are. And to the extent that parents can bring to the school evidence, really information from what I call their terrific team of advisors, and that would be the nutritionists, the child psychologists, the psychiatrists, the physical therapists, the occupational therapists, the speech therapists, the behaviorists, all the people who help you understand your child, their disabilities, their challenges, and what they need, and who document what they've learned about your child in their reports. That's my terrific team of advisors. And most of us, if we've been working with professionals to help us help our kids, have that terrific team, part of it already in place. And what I tell parents to do is to share that information, to bring that information from those providers, from early intervention, and share everything that's going on with their child so they can have an honest discussion about what your child's weaknesses and challenges are. And that requires doing something that took me a while to get over. That requires being open and honest about them. So if my child who's 4 has a tantrum when I ask them to put their seatbelt in the car, it doesn't help me to keep that to myself. I'm much better off sharing with the school what my child's challenges are, because something else that I think parents don't have the benefit of knowing, at least I didn't way back then, is that we have really great special education laws in this country, and education is a broad concept. So it's not just that special education is for kids who are failing or who don't get good grades in school. Education is not just academics. So it's social, emotional, behavioral. So if I have a child who's gifted and scores really great on the math tests, and I do, but if he is not able to use his language in pragmatic situations, or when he was younger, if he is not able to engage, and I'm making this example a little fictitious now, but if I have a child who is on the spectrum, who is gifted in math and scores great on their exams, but he's not able to have a conversation with his peers, or he gets overwhelmed by anxiety in the company of his peers, those challenges are an appropriate subject for the school team to talk about, and they are appropriate challenges for schools to put programming in place or interventions to help that child learn and be successful and grow in school.
Yeah. What I find so fascinating and also really helpful about all of that, Greer, is first of all, the first step, answering the question about not requiring a diagnosis, because many parents find that the stumbling block. So that is a huge piece of information to let people know that they can go out there and approach their schools without a diagnosis. And because, the reality is a lot of these kids are actually hard to diagnose because they're just on the fringes of a number of different diagnoses, and it takes a really long time sometimes. So knowing that you can go in and report these things to the school and ask for help that early is a really, really helpful piece of information, because as we know that the process does take a while to get the ball rolling. And the other thing I love hearing is your summary of the terrific team of advisors or of providers that people have, and which is true. We all have those. And I think one of the things that you have in your book that is very helpful is in the appendix as well, is you talk about all the information that you need to bring into the school and the reports and such. And you've got a great section in the back of your book in the appendix about how to set up a binder for your child to organize all this information, so you make sure you have it all there. So if people are listening to this, if you pick up Greer's book, you'll get that in the appendix and a checklist and an organization of what you need to include when you start approaching the school. So after you've done that, what tends to be the next stumbling block that parents, they're working on building their relationship, they've approached the school. Where do they tend to hit stumbling blocks along the process?
That's a very good question. And there are a number of places where families hit stumbling blocks. One of the places I would say is with follow through. And I don't mean to jump ahead of what parents' rights are and what the categories that can make a child eligible for special education and presenting all the information you need to the team so that together you can find the right program for the child. But I'd love to jump to follow through, because a lot of times I find that even when you have an IEP, it's the same as when you're in business and you signed a contract. It's just a piece of paper. And I find that a lot of times, even when children have an IEP, there's not always the follow through that has to happen. So let me just give you a quick example. My son had an IEP that called for him to have a paraprofessional in his classroom for certain times during the day. And from what my child was telling me when he came home, and again, elementary school, I what he tells me goes on, I have no idea if it all resembles his day. He's a kid and not able to communicate that much to me at this time. But I was really wondering if the paraprofessional was there for the times that she was supposed to be. And of course, getting that paraprofessional in place was no easy feat. I went through all the steps, presenting all the information about my child's needs and what would meet them. And we worked as a team to come to the conclusion that the paraprofessional was indeed appropriate for him. But so now it was in place, but I really wasn't sure that it was happening. So I didn't pick up the phone and call and scream at the principal. I didn't write a nasty letter. I didn't make any accusations. What I did do was ask to meet with the teacher one-on-one and just sit down with her at one of those little tables and chairs in the classroom and write down with her, go through my son's schedule to see where he was at what hour of the day and whether or not the professional was there with him. And when we did that exercise side by side, it became very clear that the accommodation that was in place or supposed to be in place for my son really wasn't there. And when that became apparent, and it became equally apparent to the teacher at that point as it was to me, the principal immediately fixed the problem. Now, I credit the principal for jumping in to fix a problem. Hey, I'm the first to admit I make tons of mistakes. I'm human, and I want my kids to know they're human, and that's okay. What matters is what you do about it, right? When you realize you messed up. So I credit the school for fixing that problem immediately when it became clear that it was a problem. But my point for parents is that never would have, or may never have come up if I hadn't been involved, listening to my child, going into the school, following through, and making sure that what was in place on paper for my child was happening. And then the next step, monitoring and making sure that the plan is working. Because I find with my students, I mean, both for my own children and also for the children that I work with, once a year, your team gets together for an IEP meeting. That's great. That's to revise your child's program, plan for next year, and set new goals, among other things. But children change so quickly. And I strongly suggest that parents request a progress meeting with their schools. I do it every 8 weeks, to sit down in a cooperative spirit with all the teachers and therapists working with my child so that they have a chance to focus on what's working, what's not working, and to brainstorm. Because at those sessions, you often get some great interventions that don't really cost any money or not much at all, but they can make a very big difference in how your child is doing in school and how the teachers work with them, and can be really valuable. So I do also think that it's very important for parents to know that they are their child's best advocate, not just when it comes to getting a program in place for them, but ongoing. Go into the school whenever you can. Deliver those chicken nuggets. Bring in that violin your child forgot. Speak to teachers, therapists, one-on-one. Speak to them, off the record about your concerns to really understand all that you can about what's out there, how your child's doing. And I think when schools see that you care that much as a parent, in addition to the fact that you have, my book tucked in the front pocket of your binder, and they know that you've educated yourself and you know your rights, I think that you will find a cooperative, productive response and approach returned to you. And I think very often school professionals are taking their cue from parents. And that's also why I'm always respectful. I'm always professional. I don't argue out of emotion. I hope my love for my kids is clear. But when I ask for something, it's calmly. It's based on the evidence. It's based on what the trusted team of advisors, the professionals who help me understand my child, recommend and know about who my child is. And I don't enjoy confrontation, but when I know I'm asking for something that my child needs and is entitled to, I feel much more comfortable doing so. And I don't feel like I have to resort to getting that upset or making it personal, because I have those tools. But the reason I need to speak to more parents, and the reason that I do this, is because I think parents, unfortunately, often don't have those tools. And so they're left with frustration because they're in the position that I was in, where I knew I cared as much as I could. I knew I would do anything in the world to help my child, but I just didn't know what the right thing to do was. And I didn't know what tools I had to use and what the law was and what my rights were and how to go about accessing the resources that are there and that were available to them.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's very true that building those relationships goes a long way over time to not having that adversarial relationship. However, I know that not everybody is going to get the same response with their schools when they do actually speak with them. I'm sure that there are people that have encountered unfortunate circumstances that way. So let's maybe talk a little bit about what parents' rights are, so they can, in a broad sense. I know they're going to need to dive into it a little bit deeper, but at a top level, what are the rights of the parents as they go in to talk to their schools?
Great. So wonderful question. And let me try to say succinctly what's most important for parents to know. Parents are entitled for their children to a free, appropriate public education. It's called FAPE for short. So that means at no cost to the parent, the child is entitled to receive an appropriate education. What is appropriate? Appropriate means an education where the child is receiving meaningful educational benefit. So it all comes down to, for each individual child, what is a meaningful educational benefit? And what schools do when they evaluate children for special education and related services is they test the child. They often administer an IQ test, a test of the child's cognitive potential. That's what it's supposed to be, although there are many tests, and we can talk more about how they differ and why some are not appropriate for some children, particularly children on the spectrum. And they also do achievement testing to test what a child has learned. And the school is looking to see whether the program that the child is receiving is resulting in their achievement being on par with what their potential for learning is. But again, we're not just talking about academics, because the purpose of special education in this country is threefold. It's really to educate students with disabilities so that they're prepared for post-secondary education if they plan to go on to college, employment, and independent living. So children are entitled to receive special education and related services in this country if they have a disability that impairs their functioning, so they're not making meaningful gains towards those goals in light of their own potential. And parents need to know that there are many assessments that can be given to children to figure out what their potential is and what their strengths and weaknesses are. And parents are a part of the process of figuring out what evaluations schools need to do to help evaluate their children in areas of need. And parents can also augment that or ask for independent evaluations. And parents also need to know that while the program that is ultimately designed to help a child needs to be based on the individual child's needs, every public school district has has an array of programming. They're required by law to have a continuum, which really means that in your public school district, many parents don't realize that there are many different classrooms, programs that are designed to meet the needs of kids with different learning challenges or other disabilities. And I try to go through in the book from most restrictive to least restrictive what those options tend to be, because I just find that when parents are more informed about what the choices are, they can say, I know that our school has an inclusion program where there's a general education teacher and a special education teacher. And since my child really benefits from exposure to like peers for the social interaction, but needs a little more support academically, I wonder if that's a placement that we should look at together for my child to see if it works. So I find that parents often don't know that there are inclusion classrooms often in their districts, or resource room classes that have a special education teacher teaching a smaller number of students, and that there are other classrooms that take an ABA approach, often for children on the spectrum, but not solely for those children. There often are language and learning-based disabilities classrooms that take a different approach, often at a slower pace, for children who struggle with challenges in the realm of speech and language. And there are other options, many modifications and accommodations that are available. And the more parents can learn about what's out there, the more they can bring options to the table, so that as a team, you can pick what's right for your child. One thing I encourage parents to do if they have children, even who are not yet of public school age, is to know that in their district, the law requires every public school district to have a special education parent committee. So that's your PTA, but for parents of kids with special needs. Those are a great place to become a regular, because at those meetings, not only do you get to hear from presenters who might be like me or someone talking about a specific topic, but you connect with other parents like you who have kids with various challenges, and what they can share with you is what has worked for them, what they have found in their district that they were able to take advantage of, and you get other ideas of options and of how to work within your own school district. to make changes for your child. And I'm not saying that there aren't cases when it's not possible to work cooperatively with your school district. I mean, I've been to court, I've been to mediation, I've guided families through that, absolutely. I've never had to do that with my own children, and I hope never to, and that really is a last resort. But I do walk parents through, if it comes to it, if there are situations where really a parent has actually done everything right, and for some reason there's just some miscommunication that is not possible to bridge, it really is possible for parents on their own to file for mediation and bring into the situation someone who can help everyone kind of work together more cooperatively. And I fill out and put in the book, a form of mediation agreement that you can file in many states just online if you need to bring a mediator in to help resolve a problem. But really, honestly, that's your last resort. And if parents can get a hold of the information that they need, which is what I'm trying to give them, and educate sometimes the school team about both their child and what the law requires, there can be a lot of movement and a lot can be done to put in place a program that works for a child that then you continually reassess to make sure this child is making progress on their goals.
Yeah, one of the things I love in the book is you do have a number of questions, frequently asked questions that parents may ask as they go through these processes, and to the question around the mediation, you have the question in there: I'm afraid to go to a mediation myself, and I can't afford a lawyer. What do I do? And I love the quote that you put in here, which is "Feel the fear and do it anyway." And I think that and you mentioned that you keep that quote in your kitchen. I think
yes.
that quote is fantastic on many levels. I think it applies to so many things that we have to do as special needs parents, because there's so many things we have to step into that we're fearful of, but it just needs to get done. So I again, there's more to that, the answer on that question, but I do love that quote. So,
and let me say, it's all true. I mean, and the book is written really more naturally than I'm speaking now because I'm nervous. But honestly, feel the fear and do it anyway. I mean, it so captures how we live. And when you have kids with special needs, there's a lot that's frightening. There's a lot that you've never faced before. There's a lot to figure out. You feel very alone until you realize you are not alone. And it took me a while to walk into those meetings with other parents and be, oh my goodness, everyone's going to know I have a child with special needs. Well, guess what? I do. And I'm not the only one. And I'm part of an amazing group of moms and dads who know what really matters, who really get it, who are my favorite people in the world to talk to. And there's so much that we collectively can do, and so much that I find that other moms like me and myself want to do to help each other. So the other thing I want to say is, it took me a long time to be kind of bold enough to speak to other parents and get the help that I needed so that I could help my kids. But I realized, one, I know my kids are great kids. There's nothing wrong with my kids, just like there's nothing wrong with you and me. They've got strengths and challenges and weaknesses and needs like everyone else in the world. And I have a friend of mine who says, everyone's got something cooking in their kitchen. And I think it's so true. And I try to tell my kids, as early as they're able to understand, everyone has strengths and weaknesses. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. No one is. But I really feel like it's my job to empower my kids to know these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, but I'm a great kid, because one day our kids, and very soon you see when they have IEP, starting at age 14, they're going to be called into their IEP meetings. You can deal with that in other ways, but they're going to have to advocate for themselves. And my daughter, who has numerous challenges, including a math disability. I mean, do I want her to sit in class and think, oh my goodness, I must be a moron because everyone else is done with the math class and this looks like Greek to me? Or do I want her to say to herself in her head, I know I'm a smart cookie and I know that this is hard for me and I know I just have a math disability and I'm going to learn this, but I'm just going to learn this in a different way. And it may take me a little longer, but I'll get there. But there's nothing wrong with me. And, I think it's so much more helpful, both helpful and helpful for our kids to have an understanding of their own strengths and weaknesses, just like it helps me, so that they are better able to be successful. And by that, I mean, confident and happy, number one, in the world. So feel the fear and do it anyway. I mean, that's not, I really do believe that as parents, it is the most difficult job, and that often I need to do that. So I tell parents, when you go into that IEP meeting, it is so intimidating. But I say, find that source of strength in you to be that confident mom or dad at the table who is not afraid to ask any question, because you have the most power at that IEP table. You are not bound by politics, by budget constraints. You can ask any question about what's going on with your child and what they need. And parents, when I was little, I once had a speech therapist whisper to me in the hallways of the school when I was going about seeing whether my son was eligible for special education. And she whispered to me, but I can shout it. She said, parents don't know their power. And that is so true. You have great power as a parent. You have the most power at that table to ensure that your child's educational needs are met. And once you know how to work with the school in a cooperative way, in a problem-solving, team-building way, at the same time, so nice does not mean powerless, at the same time that you are armed with an understanding of what your child is entitled to by law, in order to the progress that they're entitled to be making, you can do a great deal to make a huge difference in your child's future. Because I always say to the teachers and therapists who are now in place working with my children, you're changing my child's life. It is that big. It is that important, the difference that these people can make in your child's life and how they feel about themselves. And when children have issues that are not addressed, when they have learning differences or other issues that they don't get the help, the education they need to conquer, that's when I have seen professionally many times when later on there are other problems of anxiety or depression because children are facing a challenge that either no one else seems to understand, or they're not getting help with, or that they themselves don't understand. And once parents just know the basics of the tools that they can use, the evaluations they can ask for, the services like occupational therapy and speech therapy and physical therapy that can be used within their own public school districts to help children meet measurable goals, you really can get on a road that is incredible for your child. And it's not easy, and it changes. Your child's needs change. You know how quickly our kids change. So as a parent, it really is a big job. It really is a full-time job, parenting, and maybe doubly so when you have a child with special needs. But I really love for parents to know that they have the power to do this. They really do. And as emotional as parents get over the issue, and I cannot tell you how many buckets of tears I've cried, but it is just how emotional you are, how much you care, that makes you your child's best advocate, because no one will care the way you do. And continue to ask, and continue to ask, and continue to ask if you still haven't found the right solution until your child is making progress.
Yeah, I think it's a great message for all of us to remember. I mean, we do this when it comes to the medical needs of our kids, and we need to follow through and do that with the educational needs. And I think the whole conversation around who is in the power position is really interesting, because I think a lot of us, especially initially, are very intimidated by a lot of the medical professionals and feel timid about putting our thoughts and concerns out there because we don't feel like we know enough. But tools like, the information in your book are going to go a long way to giving parents that confidence that they can go in and have these conversations and understand, like you said, the power that they have to ensure that their kids get what they need. One of the things I also really loved in the back of your book too, in the appendix again, is just a reminder for people to send a thank you note, outlining some things from your IEP meeting. Thank you notes are a lost art in this world, and I think it would be a surprise and delight but it also helps reinforce the meeting. Is that the intent of that?
Twofold. One, I think expressing gratitude and appreciation to the team is essential. I mean, I tell my kids when they've lost their shoe and they can't find it, if you blame me, it doesn't really make me feel like helping you go look for it. Now, I want these wonderful, amazing teachers and therapists who are working with my kids to want to help my child. I don't want to make that hard for them. I want to let them know that I sincerely appreciate that they are going above and beyond very often to help my child. So when I catch a paraprofessional outside helping ease my child who is crying into the school day, I send a thank you note, and you better believe I send a copy to the principal. I want the school to know that I appreciate their efforts, because they honestly are making a life-changing difference. And I think it goes a long way to let people know that you see them, that you understand how much they care. And things will go wrong, but when they do, I don't blame anyone. I say, okay, this is where we are. What can we try now? When there's a problem, I offer my support, ask what's been tried, and ask what we can try next. But in addition, parents, as advocates, need to keep a record. So when you're keeping all the information about your child, so that you've got your binder with everything, one binder. I have an electric 3-hole punch, which is such a help to parents, to busy parents. I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. Everything that comes home that pertains to your child, whether it's your psychology, evaluation, whether it's your report card, although those are less important in determining how a child is doing. You really need the standardized testing. Whether it's a report from my child's nutritionist or behaviorist, evidence of the fact that I see on their homework that they can't do one problem independently. So I make a copy of that before I help them finish the rest. Whether it's a journal I've kept as to how many tantrums my child is throwing a day, or how often they stutter in an hour and when it happens. All that information, that's data, that's evidence, that's information that I keep in one place in my chronological file for my child. And I've got one for each child for each school year with a big, beautiful picture of my child's face on the front. So everyone knows we're talking about a child. We're talking about an individual. And when there's a meeting with the school, you must put everything in writing. Recollections differ. If you have a meeting, I don't mean a side chat with the teacher where you're tossing out ideas and everyone's just speaking freely and just throwing out ideas. I mean, if you have an IEP meeting, or you have a crucial conversation with someone in the administration or your case manager, and you reach an agreement as to what will be put in place for your child. You write a thank you note to the team. Along with my thank you note to the team for working with me productively at an IEP meeting, I list, let me summarize, this is where we are. We are going to revisit the issue of getting an assistive technologies evaluation for my son in 3 months, at which point we're going to take a look at samples of his handwriting over the past month and review it with the occupational therapist to see if he's made any progress. And at that point, we're going to make a determination as to whether to bring in someone to do an assistive technologies evaluation. Or if I have a meeting and there's an agreement that goals will be changed, or that the program's going to be modified in some way, or there's an issue that was discussed, I put that all in writing. And it's so important that those agreements be in writing, because, as I said, recollections do change. And your ongoing record of what's going on, if you should ever have a dispute down the road, which I hope you never have, that record is your evidence as to what's been happening, what the program is for your child, and of how well it's doing, and whether something else different has to be done.
Yeah. I'll go one step further. That record can also be very, very helpful in assessing, obviously, all the treatments and therapies, be it inside the school as well as outside the school. So it does double duty. And I'm a big proponent of writing everything down and monitoring and tracking, because I think it's, in a lot of ways, because our kids, their treatments and therapies and whatever we're doing with them are so multifaceted. It's the only way we can really figure out what's going well and what isn't. And so it's incredibly helpful to do this both inside and outside the school.
And in addition to keeping a record of those agreements and the communication and that informal information you have about how your child is doing, let me just make a point about standardized testing. Very often children would come into, or parents would come into my office before I met the child and bring me the children's records. And a lot of times they bring the report cards, which I love to see because they're beautiful and you have those personal remarks. But your child's grades in school very often are a poor reflection of whether their program is appropriate or working for them. Because, honestly, I think if every child tries in school, they should be getting A's, truthfully, if the program's appropriate. But what we really need to assess what our child's potential is in various domains and whether they're meeting their potential, which is the expectation we can have for our kids, is the standardized testing. So if you are concerned that despite years of speech therapy or years of not having speech therapy, your child's language is not appropriate, you need to request a speech and language evaluation. Either do one privately or request one from the school. And if you request one from the school and they do one and you find that the result in that test or any test does not match your understanding of your child, whether it's an IQ test, a speech eval, you have the right to request what is called an independent evaluation of your child, which means the school's done an evaluation. It doesn't seem to capture your child. It just doesn't seem right. You have the right to request that the school, at its expense, do another evaluation, and there's a process for working with the school to pick an evaluator who is independent, who is paid by the school district but doesn't work for the school, to take another look at your child and see what's missing. And parents also have the right to do their own evaluations and bring information to the school that the school does not have to accept outright, but they do need to consider and often adds to and helps fill out the picture of who the child is. And another point about these standardized tests that I want to say, I have a child who's on the spectrum, and when the school first evaluated him using the testing instrument that they had, they got an IQ that, I don't know, I wasn't sure if it was right. And I showed someone on my terrific team of advisors, one of the private providers that I was working with. And she said to me, that doesn't look like your child. His IQ is much higher than that. And what I did is some research. I spoke to a private person who does testing of children, and I worked with her to have my son retested using a different measure. And one thing I want to point out, because I know a lot of your listeners have children with autism, as I do, the standard test that most schools give to children, the Western Intelligence Test, is not appropriate for every child. And the test itself has information on it about which children it's appropriate for. And if you think that your child has been given an IQ test that, for instance, tests the disability, an IQ test is to test your child's potential. That means if we were able to remove the effect of the disability, what would my child be able to achieve? So if you're giving a child who has a speech or language disability a test that requires them to understand language to answer, you're testing the disability. You're not going to get a true picture of what that child could achieve if the effects of their language challenge were removed. So using alternative testing, in my case, I was able to find a much greater cognitive ability and potential that my child has to learn. And the reason that is important is because under the law, our children are entitled not to the Cadillac of education. Courts have actually used that term. They're entitled to an appropriate education. That just means not one that lets them reach their potential, but that is appropriate and enables them to receive meaningful educational benefit, which is defined as meaningful gains in light of their potential. So if I can go to the school and say, guess what? My child's IQ is not, I'm going to pick numbers, my child's IQ is not 50, it's 110. Well, that gives the school a lot more information about programming and how to assess their programming. Because if the achievement of my child on those achievement tests is coming out around the 50 level, no longer is that gain appropriate and meaningful. Actually, in light of my child's true potential, it's indicating that the program may not be the right one. Yeah. So I just want to suggest to parents that when you have doubts, is the program working or not? Look to see what types of objective assessments the team can do or that you can do privately to get a true sense of who your child is, what their true innate abilities are, so that you can assess whether the learning approach is not right for them. And that's part of why you're seeing what you're seeing. And it's really hard to do that sometimes unless you get those standardized assessments. And schools are required to assess children in all areas of suspected disabilities. So if you can bring that evidence of what you're seeing, you can work as a team to do some evaluations to find out whether the program is in fact working. And you can repeat assessments, which is why I often tell parents, don't wait those triennial reevaluations. There are certain instances in which you might, which I go through, but you need to keep on top of how your child is doing on those assessments so you can see if your child is making progress. And if not, you can have the discussion with the team about why not.
Yeah. It's amazing how important that aspect is to it, and a lot of the parents, when we first start out, we just assume that the tests are the tests, and we don't have options. So it's great to know that information. Sorry, go ahead.
And the only thing I would add to that then it is if you don't know what test to ask for, what I would do as a parent is then say to the IEP team, these are the challenges that I'm seeing that my child is having. This is the evidence. This is the handwriting. This is a recording of how my child speaks. This is what I'm seeing. What tests, what standardized tests or evaluations can we do to get a better understanding of what is going on and the challenge that my child is facing and how it affects him in school?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It's very akin to when we're not worrying about the diagnosis as much as looking at the symptoms, and by giving that information, the people that understand these things will be able to better guide us.
And Tara, I have to add, sometimes parents will see or be told by schools the child's behaving in a certain way, and something that I always say is everything is behavior. The question is why. Mm-hmm. And parents, I think, often need to take on that role of helping educate the teen and themselves and their child about the what's going on and the why, because that leads to then, of course, what can we try? What can we do about it?
Yeah. So before I let you go, because I really appreciate your input, there's one other thing that you mentioned in the book that it would be nice to touch on. And it was one of the questions you ask or parents ask, but what exactly the 15-day rule is. And you stress how important this is. So if you don't mind touching on that, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Because there's one sad case where a parent unfortunately didn't know and had a bad experience. So when your child has an IEP, the first IEP, the first individualized education program for your child, does not go into effect until you as the parent sign and agree. But after that, every year when you have an IEP meeting, and afterwards, don't sign the IEP at the meeting. Take it home, think about it, let them know you need time to process it. That IEP, if you don't sign it, will automatically go into effect 15 days after the school gives you a copy of the IEP that says proposed IEP. So what parents need to know is that if that proposed IEP, that written document that the school gives you, has in it a change in your child's placement or a reduction in services that you disagree with. Say your child's at an out-of-district private school for children with dyslexia, and the school thinks your child's made enough progress and it's time to return in district, but you disagree really strongly. It is not enough to tell the case manager. It's not enough to tell the teacher. It's not enough to write an email to the case manager saying you disagree with this change. If you are not able to work out that important disagreement with the school and change the written IEP, before 15 days expires, you must file the written mediation form with the state to have the school be required to keep the plan as it is until a mediator can come and resolve it. And in the book, I have a form of the mediation request filled out as if you're a parent filling it out for your child who has a dispute with the school. But you can find information on your website, usually for your local school district, if not the state website, about how to file for mediation. It's a simple form, but parents need to know to ask for help doing that if they need. But if there is a big dispute, not I want an OT twice a week and they're only offering it once a week, not that I agree with this goal, I want to add some additional goals, but I'm talking about a reduction in services that really matters to you, or a change of placement that is significant and affects your child's program in a big way. Parents need to know they must file for mediation before the 15 days expires in order to invoke what is called stay put and keep the equivalent of the current program in place for the following year until a mediator can help the parties resolve it.
Yeah, that is really, really important. So I'm glad we had an opportunity to touch on it, because it would be, I would imagine, like you said, you had a parent that didn't know, and that could have huge implications. It takes a long time to reverse a lot of these things. So
yes,
that's fantastic to know. So if you want to know more about all of these things, I really encourage everybody to pick up a copy of Greer's book, What Every Parent Should Know About Special Education Law. There'll be a link again in the show notes so that you can both pick up a copy of her book and also a link to her website and Facebook page, So you can connect with her there if you want to. You can always also post questions in the My Child Will Thrive Facebook group, and I can obviously forward them along to Greer there. I'm hoping she'll join us in that group as well when she has a chance. And I just have to thank you so much for writing the book and taking the time to share so much of it with us today. I think it's going to be a fabulous resource to parents, and both in the United States, but so much of what we spoke about today applies to all parents that are going to get help for their kids in public school. So that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me this week on My Child Will Thrive. I'm so passionate about giving you the tools and information you need to help your child recover. And as they say, it takes a village, so join us in the My Child Will Thrive Village Facebook group, where you can meet like-minded parents and stay up to date on everything we have going on at My Child Will Thrive. This is Tara Hunkin, and I'll catch you on the next podcast or over at mychildwillthrive.com.